Hey everybody, welcome back. There's been a lot going on in the fandoms, like which makes me very, very happy. So I have a lot to talk about. I meant to get another video out last week and it kind of got away from me, but I did finally finish watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I'm going to post that today, and then we've had quite a few things come out, quite a few discussions. I've got lots of asks, so I'm going to get as many videos out this week as I can. Okay, try to get it all touched upon because again, there's a lot going on leading up to the premiere of season three, which just makes me happy because all of it is really good. But let's talk about this first because you guys have been asking me to do this. I'm going to basically put this in three parts. I'm going to give you a basic idea of the plot, and then we're going to talk about spaghetti westerns, and then I'm going to tell you ways in which I think this might tie into Beth. Now, I will say that at one point when I just started with researching spaghetti westerns in general, I had this moment where I went, maybe this really has nothing to do with Beth. Maybe they're talking more about the tone and the way it was filmed. And you'll understand what I mean when I talk about spaghetti westerns. But then I watched it and I went, okay, I can actually see some things that could be the case. So let's just dive in. So, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay, I'm going to give you a really quick rundown of what happens in the plot. You can also get on Wikipedia and read this. But the idea is that there are these three men who are all looking for the same treasure. That is the basic conflict that you're going to find. Now, I'm going to warn you guys, this is a very old film, and it's about 3 hours long. And man, honestly, it was a little hard to get through because what was happening in the film, like the plot line, was actually pretty good. But every single scene, they would have like 5 or 6 minutes where nothing happened. Like two guys would come in and they would stare at each other and the camera would go back and forth between their faces. And then they would sit down and there was tension because, they really wanted to kill each other. So one of them would sit down and the other one would sit down and then they would stare at each other and then they would start to eat. And it was like, oh my gosh, can we get to the actual story, please? So if all of that had been cut and it had been a little more tightly told in film form, it probably would have only been like 90 minutes long. So I'm just saying it's a little bit difficult to get into. It's just a very old school way of telling a story. So basically what happens is we have, obviously Clint Eastwood is the good, quote unquote, the good. This guy, his name is Angel Eyes in the middle. He's the bad. And then Tuco is the ugly. And um, it starts out, I think part of the problem with the reason it ran so long is because they wanted to show some history between Clint Eastwood's character, whose name is Blondie, by the way, they call him Blondie, and Tuco. So Tuco is just like a lifelong criminal, right? And Clint Eastwood, you get the idea he might be a bounty hunter of some kind, and he gets a hold of Tuco and takes him in to collect the bounty on his head. So he turns him in, collects the bounty, and then they're going to hang Tuco for all of his crimes because he has a very high bounty on his head because he's wanted for so many crimes. So they put him on a horse and they put a noose around his neck and they're going to hang him. And just before they do, uh, Blondie, Clint Eastwood's character, shoots the rope. And Tuco gets away. He just rides the horse out of the town and is free. And then you see the two of them coming together, meeting, and splitting the bounty. So they have this whole fraud thing going on where they are, pretending to bring him in so that Clint Eastwood can grab the bounty, and then he makes sure that Tuco gets away and they split the money. So they do this a few times, but then you can tell they start to get sick of each other. And Tuco's complaining that he should get more of the bounty because he's the one whose life is at stake. He almost gets hung every time. And Clint Eastwood doesn't really like that, and he's kind of sick of Tuco. So he ends up taking all of the money and leaving Tuco to die, basically, in the desert. He strands him. Tuco lives. He goes and finds people to help him, and then he vows he's going to get revenge on Blondie. He eventually does. There's a point where he gets him at gunpoint and forces him to walk across the desert for days without any water. Now, Tuco is there, forcing him to keep walking, and Tuco has water, but he's just not giving any of it to Blondie. So then it gets to the point where Blondie's on the edge of death because he hasn't had water in so long. And just as Tuco's about to finish him off, a runaway horse, and to me it looked like a stagecoach almost, but if you read the plot synopsis, it's actually an ambulance, and the reason is because the Civil War is going on. So obviously there were people that were put in this, quote unquote ambulance, which is horse drawn, and then they were probably going to be taken to a medical unit, but the horses got away and just started running. So Tuco sees them and he, stops the horses and looks inside, and most of the people inside have died from their wounds. But there is one man who talks about, he's still alive, and he talks about basically $250,000 in coins that he buried. He stole it from the Confederate Army. So this was a payment that was supposed to go to the Army, and he got a hold of it and stole it and buried it somewhere. So of course Tuco wants that money. So he gets the guy to tell him what cemetery it's buried in. And then he goes to get him some water. And when he returns, this man has expired. He's passed away. But before he died, Blondie, who was still alive, if barely, got the man to tell him which grave it was buried in. So the idea is that the cemetery is huge, like hundreds of graves. And if they don't know which grave it's buried in, they're never going to find it, right? So then they become partners because Tuco knows which cemetery it's buried in, but Blondie doesn't. And Blondie knows what the name on the grave marker that it's buried in is, but Tuco doesn't. So they have to work together. And then, of course, guy number 3 also hears about the treasure through a different route, and they're all trying to get it. Okay, so that's the basic gist of the plot. And they keep getting kind of roped in to the Civil War that's going on. So they get picked up by in this case, Northern soldiers and taken as like POWs because they're believed to be Southerners. And they end up in a war camp. And, it's like they're seeing the war through the eyes of the soldiers and all the terrible stuff that's going on. And we see them being both compassionate and also pretty brutal about things. And so it goes back and forth and all that sort of thing. Eventually, Blondie and Tuco get to a point where they are in a war camp, and the northern soldiers and the southern soldiers are fighting over a bridge that goes over the river. And it's understandable why. That's a really important passage to control because it's a route they could use to get supplies. So whoever controls that bridge is going to have an easier time of things. But Tuco and Blondie need to get past this point because the cemetery they're looking for is on the other side, and they just have no way to get through without being part of the battle or, getting shot themselves. So they decide that the easiest thing to do is to blow up the bridge, because if there's no bridge, then no one can have it, and they're going to stop fighting over this particular area. So that's what they do. They get a hold of some dynamite, some explosives, and they blow up the bridge. Before they blow it up, Tuco suggests that maybe they need to tell each other what they know, just in case one of them gets killed. Because if one of them gets killed, the other one's not going to have any hope of finding the treasure. So they do. Tuco tells him which cemetery it's buried in, and he tells him the name of the grave marker. They do get separated when the explosives go off, and we're seeing the film through Tuco's point of view. He doesn't know if Blondie's still alive or anyone else, and he might be the only one left who's searching for the treasure. So he goes to the cemetery, and there's this really long scene of him running through the cemetery looking for the right grave marker. I mean, it goes on for like 10 minutes, you guys. And eventually he finds it. And he starts digging, and just as he's getting down toward where it might be buried and finds the box, Blondie shows up. He is still alive, and he hands him a shovel and says, keep digging, Well, then Angel Eyes, the third guy, also shows up. So they're all still alive. They're all still trying to get the treasure. As Tuco digs, though, he finds out that this is not the right grave marker, that Blondie told him the wrong name on purpose. When he told him, he lied. So the grave that he dug up just has a skeleton in it. There's no treasure. So Blondie says that he will write the name of the grave marker on a rock, and then he puts it in the center of this big open space, and they're basically having a 3-way shootout, if you will. The typical shootout you see in Westerns where it's like whoever draws first and shoots wins, but there's 3 of them instead of 2. And basically whoever lives will get to look at the name on the stone and will get to go get the treasure. Well, I'm going to give you spoilers here for how it ends, but Blondie shoots Angel Eyes, who's the bad guy, and he gets killed. And what Tuco finds out when he tries to fire his gun is that it's empty. Blondie had unloaded his gun, and he didn't know it. So needless to say, both Blondie and Tuco live, but Blondie would have been the winner there because he was the only one who had bullets, at least after he killed Angel Eyes. So then he shows him the right grave, and it's actually right next to the one he told him it was, but it's an unmarked grave, or it's not unmarked, it's an unknown grave. So obviously this was an unknown soldier, and the writing on the grave just says unknown. But they dig there, and they do find the treasure. They find like 6 huge bags of coins. That's just, you can tell I mean, $250,000 back then is like millions today. Okay, so they are very, very wealthy. But then Blondie he doesn't take Tuco's share of the treasure. He leaves it, but he makes Tuco stand up on this really unstable grave marker and puts a noose around his neck so that and then he ties his hands behind his back too, so he can't take off the noose. And if he falls, he's just going to hang. And then he takes off. And Tuco's yelling after him, going, "Don't do this to me, don't do this to me." But he did leave Tuco's share of the treasure there. He didn't take it all. So he gets a little bit further away. Till he's like, however far away in the distance. And then he turns around with his gun and shoots the rope again so that Tuco falls and he lives. And basically the movie ends with Tuco yelling after him saying, you're a son of a bitch and that sort of thing. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. Okay. So just to give you an idea of what happens in the film. So let's talk about spaghetti westerns for a minute. This is just Wikipedia. You can go through and read all of this if you want, but I actually learned some things I didn't know. So for one thing, the reason they're called spaghetti westerns is because even though they were about the American West, like that's where the stories are set, they actually were not, for the most part, produced in America. They were produced in Italy and Spain, right? Spain. That should sound a little familiar. Um, and so spaghetti is actually a reference to Italy because Italy dominated the market. You can see where I'm getting this right here in this paragraph. Over 600 European Westerns were made between 1960 and 1978. 600 in 20 years. And Italy dominated the market. So they called them spaghetti westerns, which it just means like an Italian western or an Italian made western. They were made on low budgets. They were shot at various locations around Italy and Spain. So this is what I mean when I say, when they say this, maybe it's really just because they're in Spain and they're filming it there and it's got a Western feel to it. That really might be what they're talking about. That it feels like a Western by the guy who directed this movie. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that they are specifically, so you might notice that even though Blondie was the quote unquote good, he was still kind of morally gray. He wasn't like this really excellent moral guy. He still did things that were kind of shady in the show, but they all did. And that's exactly how they wanted the characters to be for these Westerns. They were, number one, um, doing something in direct opposition to the really good guy cowboys that were being portrayed in American Westerns, like John Wayne roles, right? And two, remember that this is Italy and the Italian culture has always glorified, especially in film, they have always glorified gangsters. And so that's part of it. It's their culture, but they're sort of projecting it onto American Westerns. So really, these guys are supposed to be like gangster cowboys, not literal gangsters, but have like a gangster mentality. And that also feels like it's very relevant to The Walking Dead because we're always finding morally gray situations and morally gray people, right? So that was kind of interesting. It was interesting to learn that. But when it comes to the actual film, there are some things that stuck out to me. I mean, Sergio Lione is the director who they specifically mentioned, and they mentioned him more than once by name. And so, yeah, he may have been one of the really famous directors of spaghetti westerns, but this movie in particular is very well known. Most people have heard of it, even if they hadn't seen it. And it's the one that supposedly really catapulted Clint Eastwood to fame. He certainly wasn't his first film by any means, but it's one that really made him very, very famous. And so it does seem like they are talking about this film in particular rather than just more generally spaghetti westerns. And that makes it seem like, maybe we should pay attention to the plot a little bit. So here's the things that I picked out that I think could end up being uh, relevant in some way, right, to Beth's story. First of all, there's the fact that his name is Blondie. It's a detail, but it's really hard to get past that because she has blonde hair and there's been such an emphasis on the blonde hair. So it feels like if they are picking this film for its plot, that's got to be one of the considerations, right? They're picking a film where the main character is named Blondie. And he's not necessarily a sheriff, but he wears the cowboy boots and the hat, right? And rides a horse. And he's like bringing Tuco to justice, even if he was being a bit fraudulent about it. So he's got kind of the role or the feel of a sheriff in the story. The probably the biggest thing for me in terms of theme is that they're searching for treasure. And uh, we would say that for Daryl, his treasure is going to be Beth. I mean, we could say that in so many ways. Not only is it like a metaphor, right, for the way he feels about her, of course, but there's like the jade that he found in the road in season 4. Um, I was reminded so many times when I was watching this of Rick's Rock in the Road story, which is a story about finding treasure under a rock, right? Um, there were just so many things that made me think of that, in the way that they talked about looking for the treasure, in the fact that Blondie took the rock and was going to write the name of the grave marker on the rock and like put it down in the road, and then they were going to have a gunfight over it. I mean, it just everything kept bringing that back to me. Um, and then we can also connect it to the cemetery at the end. And let me talk about something else, and then I'll come back to the cemetery. There's the bridge. The bridge itself obviously is a big symbol in The Walking Dead, and especially around Beth. Now, obviously, they would have not been using it in the same way in 1960 in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But the way, and you know what, it might have even been here. The way that I was reading about, let's see. It just struck something with me the way that somebody was talking about the plot. So it says, let's see, distrusting of Angel Eyes, Blondie finds Tuco and together they're going to kill the gang. En route to the cemetery, the duo witness a battle over a strategic bridge. They decide to blow it up to disperse the armies and clear the path. Um, maybe this wasn't the right one, but I read somewhere, I read a synopsis of this where it said the bridge they were trying like in blowing up the bridge it cleared the path for them to the cemetery, which was true, but it almost felt like such a symbolic thing to say if you were talking about The Walking Dead, like something about the bridge leads to the cemetery, and something about the cemetery is really important when it comes to Beth. So think about it this way. In Consumed, we saw Daryl and Carol go off the bridge, but more importantly, it was the bridge that made them realize where Beth was, which I talked about last week, right? Um, we that's where they figured out that she was at Grady Memorial Hospital. So them going to the bridge, and then of course they had to fall off the bridge because they were surrounded by walkers. It was the only way for them to live. Cleared the path for them to get to Beth, but then she was shot and they believe she was killed. So in that way, the bridge cleared the path to the cemetery, right? So the bridge is interesting. And again, if and maybe it's still an if, this is all just conjecture, guys, but if they are using this film as a hint to things, then I think the bridge is a big part of it. Um, so I don't know that blowing up the bridge is part of it necessarily. We don't really see them blowing up bridges too often. But maybe they'll need to in order to find Beth. I don't know, but also that might not be part of it at all. Maybe it's just the idea of the bridge. So then we get to the cemetery, and this really struck me when I was watching it too, because we had this, like I said, this really long scene, and it has, okay, so funny personal story, has kind of epic music while Tuco was running around looking for the right grave marker. And the music sounded so familiar to me. And I was going, yeah, it could just be that because this is a classic film, I've heard the score before. But I was like, no, I've heard this somewhere. Where have I heard this? And actually, it's because it just took me a while to figure it out. There's a history podcast called History on Fire that uses that music in its intro, or maybe it's in its outro. Anyway, so it's just because it's old music and somebody, it's probably in the public domain now, and so somebody decided to use it for their podcast, and it just took me forever to figure out where I'd heard that music before, but I listened to that podcast. So anyway, it's got this really epic music, and Tuco is running back and forth for a long time looking for the right grave marker. And I was just going, okay, so we have someone searching for, technically someone who's dead in a graveyard. It just feels very, very Beth coded for symbolism, right? Because not only does Daryl obviously think that she's dead, but we had that whole scene in the graveyard in Alone. And, lots of people have come up with why that might have been there and what it might have meant. The fact that that's where he gave her a piggyback as though she didn't actually stay in the graveyard but pass through, which could be a symbol of her not having died, even though they thought she did. But I also don't know that we've entirely nailed down the reason for the graveyard. I mean, I think we have aspects of it for sure, but there may be more to it that we haven't quite hit on yet. And in this case, I couldn't help but think of the grave marker they stopped at that said beloved father. And in this case, not only were they looking for a particular grave marker, but it turned out the one they were looking for was an unknown person. So I was just sitting around thinking about it, and I was going, okay, So in this case, they were looking for the grave of an unknown person, and there was treasure inside. And it feels like kind of like that with Beth, but sort of the opposite too. It's more like the treasure is the unknown person, or um, like, oh, let me see if I can remember how I was thinking about it. Like it's not an unknown person that's buried. It's rather it's that the known person is unburied. So if they're looking for her in a cemetery, she's not going to be there, kind of thing. Anyway, it's a little bit backwards, but it's still really interesting. And at the end of the day, they do find the treasure they're looking for, and it's in the cemetery. So I don't know. Um, it does feel really purposeful and really symbolic if this is something that they meant to point to as a foreshadow or something. But like I said, it is all conjecture, and we can't know for sure what they're thinking of. And, maybe what I said at the beginning is right, and it really is just about the spaghetti Western feel to it. But what I'll do is this is about all I have. The things that I marked were that they're searching for treasure, which feels, symbolic of Daryl searching for his treasure. And in season 3, he's going to go looking for this other girl who gets taken. There's the fact that the main character's name is Blondie. There's the rock in the road feel of it all. The fact that they blew up the bridge, and then the cemetery, especially that the treasure is buried in a grave marked unknown, right? It's also, you could argue that it's also kind of a mystery that they're trying to solve, in the sense of the whole Daryl as a detective thing. And they do solve it, and they do find the treasure. So there's a lot of possibilities, but we won't really know for sure what they're going for here until we've seen the season, really. And I'll just keep an eye on this moving forward since I've watched it, and try to note any similarities I might see as we get the episodes. So I'll go ahead and end there for today. But yeah, that's what I have, and I think there's a very good possibility that they are pointing to this. So I would encourage you to either watch it or look at the uh, synopsis for it so that you're familiar with the story. And then yeah, I'll keep an eye on it. Actually, here this is a picture of at the end. You see, this is the graveyard, but there's the circle in the center. He put the rock right here in the middle. We've got one person, two person, three person, and this is where they do the shootout. So that's actually a good picture of it. But anyway, so yeah, I hope that helps those who wanted me to deconstruct the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's what I have. And yeah, we'll just keep an eye on it moving forward. All right, I'll see you guys hopefully in a couple of days in the next video.